Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. This is the final in my series talking about the potential for civil war or massive unrest in our country that I entitled Summer of 24, Prelude to War. Today I'm going to talk about beyond civil war. Is there a chance for major worldwide conflagration, possibly centered around activity here in the United States? Yes, I think there is, and I think it could happen soon. If you want to hear more about it, stick around. Okay, normally I don't say anything about subscribing and liking and helping me out with the channel until I get to the end of the video. But I feel like I need to start at the beginning of this one. I've had a few comments in the last two videos that, gee, we came here to hear gun stuff, we didn't come here to hear about politics. So I've had some people unsubscribe me. Now, I think I'm still doing pretty well. I'm about 15 months into this little YouTube experience. And I just went over 16,000 subscribers, so I thank you very much for that. Frankly, my goal in this is not only to, put out what I hope is good information for you folks that can use it, but I want to make a few bucks in my retirement. And right now, few is the apt description of how much money I make every month. So please share this around. Subscribe if you haven't. It costs nothing to do so. If you like this material, give me a like, give me a comment. That helps YouTube spread it out to more people, even though they may not want me saying what I'm going to say. So thank you for your help so far, and I appreciate all the help you can do for me as we go along. The reason I did these three politically oriented videos is this has just been building up to me for several months that some things needed to be said. And much of what I've said in the last two videos you can find on other YouTube channels or commentators on Fox News or whatever source you like to listen to. I'm going to say some stuff in this video that nobody else has really linked together and put quite into what I think is going on. And I searched extensively. Only a couple of other commenters have mentioned the number of Chinese people who have illegally entered our country and what they think they might be here to do. I mentioned in the last video I spent a lot of time on the phone with some military friends, and maybe we're all just a little bit crazy, but we think there's some really dark possibilities to the way this country is going to go. So it was compelling for me to do it, and whether or not this hurts my channel, I think it needs to be said. These Civil War, World War III videos that I put together here, they kind of follow my personal philosophy about guns. And I've mentioned this before. To me, guns are tools, not toys. And now to many gun enthusiasts, guns are toys. And that's okay. A lot of people like to go buy cool guns, go buy a lot of ammunition, go to the range and turn ammunition, turn money into empty brass. And that's fine too. It's barely a free country, but it is still a free country, and you can do that with your guns. I'm not saying you're less of a gun enthusiast than I am. We're just coming from different perspectives. In the early days of IPSC or USPSA competition, we learned that there were two categories of people. There were the terms that were put on them by some of the magazines were gamesmen, people who treat them like toys. They're playing golf with a gun, essentially. And martial artists. And these were cops, military folks. Back in those days, there really wasn't hardly any concealed carry in the country, but nowadays the concealed carry folks are going to fit into this. And that's really why the International Defensive Pistol Association, IDPA, that's really why it started, was because the martial artists wanted a home to do practical kind of competition and improve themselves in that way. And USPSA had been taken over by the gamesmen. But as I say, to me, guns are a tool. And to me, that's the heart and soul of you folks, the gun owners out there. That's what I'm talking about with these videos. We're talking about the fact that this country could be at war at some level, civil war or full-out war. And in either of those cases, we may need citizens to be prepared to defend themselves, to defend their communities, and maybe even band together into little groups that I'll talk about as I go along in this video. So whether you're a gamesman or a martial artist, we may need a lot of you to step up and become martial artists in the next few months. So that's the driving philosophy that I have, and I hope it comes through in the videos. And if you, please don't take it as an insult if you are not normally that kind of a gun enthusiast. But I ask you to just pause and think. If the shit would hit the fan, what would my primary rifle be? Have I got enough ammo for it? Do I have one load that I can zero and know it's going to be good all the time? Or do I have a kind of a hodgepodge of things? What kind of handgun would you carry and trust to be your partner if you got to go out into harm's way? Hard things to think about. A lot of people in this country have never envisioned that. Some of us are a little crazy. We always have. Some of us have always said, well, I've got this gun or this ammo, or that's for when the Russians come, or this is when the war starts. But I think what I'm going to tell you today will convince you that we may be at that point. So stick with me in this video. I'm going to back it up with several video clips of news folks around the country and tell you some of the kind of scary stuff that's going on. So hopefully you will, if you're not, to begin with, someone who looks at your gun and ammunition stash as tools to use against bad people, then I hope you have come to that conclusion by the time we get to the end. The two videos I made about global jihad when Israel was attacked and Hamas said, I think it was a date in October, this will be Global Jihad Day, which didn't come, but I think they're working towards it. In one of those videos, I showed kind of my prepper kit, and I said that I'm not planning for long-term prepping, I'm looking for short-term. But some food, some water source, some cheap radios for communications, a can of ammunition, the things you need. What I talked about in the first two videos, the United States is severely divided among political lines. And I really think it's falling into place as being more like city folk and country folk. City folk consume all the stuff this country produces, but most of it gets produced by the country folk. Now, if you look at the map, the county by county election map, the country is basically red with a few blue enclaves out there. Geographically, by the square mile, this country's red. By population, it's pretty evenly divided because those blue enclaves are so densely populated and run by such liberal woolly heads in most of the major cities. So that divide between the left and the right is, I think, at the point of being irreconcilable. In a show trial, Donald Trump was convicted of 34 felonies, crimes that were not even technically crimes, and most of the legal experts weigh in that was a politically motivated show trial. Now today, Hunter Biden was convicted on all three felony counts of his ATF 4473 form gun and drug use issues. Glory hallelujah. I think most of us figured he would get off because it was in Daddy's state of Delaware. So there is a little logic out there in the system yet. I would love to think logic could prevail and we could mend this split by nonviolent political means. But, I don't know. So the question is, if the left, if the Democratic people who are now running the White House and the Senate, if they want Trump out of the picture badly enough, what are they willing to do? Are they willing to kill him? Yeah, I think they are. I hope he's got really good Secret Service protection. And I hope they're on their toes. Because a Democrat in the House has introduced legislation to remove Secret Service protection from any protectee who gets convicted of a felony. So they're trying to take Donald Trump's Secret Service protection away from him. Now, I don't think it's ever going to pass in the House. There's enough Republicans there to put a stop to it. But it just points up the mindset of these people. They want him stopped. They don't care if they have to kill him. And I don't think they care if they have to kill a whole lot of American citizens to get what they want. And what they want is to destroy the Constitution and turn this into a communist nation. And they have essentially come out and said so for a number of years. Go look it up. Most of you viewing this are old enough to remember the movie Red Dawn. I saw this at a weekend cookout when I was a cop. It was at another cop's house. I'd heard of it, but I hadn't seen it. Somebody had gotten hold of a VHS copy, and we watched it. I think most of us were sitting there watching that movie thinking just how we would respond like the Wolverines did to fight back against the invasion of the United States. For those of you who had not seen Red Dawn, the original Red Dawn, I think it was 84 was the movie. Go look it up. Go watch the movie. It's kind of hokey now because it's outdated, but this could be what we're going to be looking at. In the fictional Red Dawn scenario, there was an airborne assault in the Rockies. Soviet troops, the planes came in claiming to be civilian aircraft, but they, disgorged thousands and thousands of Russian paratroopers. So they kind of cut the country in half at the Rocky Mountains, and then that was followed by a land invasion from the south using both Russian troops and Marxist troops from the various Central American countries. The theory behind the invasion of the United States has always revolved around a land invasion component because otherwise they've got to hit the beaches. And we have two huge oceans which we think have protected us from invasions for all these years. So how realistic could the Red Dawn scenario be? An invasion by Russia, airborne and then land-based from Central America. 84, when that movie was made, still Cold War, still the Soviet Union, not Russia, we were kind of afraid of them. Now we see that it's been a couple of years and Russia can't even take the Ukraine. I mean, they're doing a lot of damage and they may have ultimately take Ukraine, but I'm not sure we needed to be quite as afraid of Russia as we were. A lot of their equipment doesn't work the way it's supposed to. A lot of their military personnel are very poorly trained, but still, they were a superpower at the time. But I don't think Russia, obviously, is a threat to the continental United States. But recently, we gave the Ukraine permission to use weapons that we gave them to fire into Mother Russia, not just for Ukraine to use in their own internal defense. Mr. Putin didn't like that, and he made it rather clear. He said, if you give them tools to kill us in our homeland, then we are at war with you. And if you think we won't use nukes, you might want to think again. Putin is a little bit of a modern Hitler, I think. He's a little bit crazy, and crazy people do crazy things. So we have to take all of these things seriously. Ukraine could explode. The Middle East, Hamas and Israel taking in the Gaza Strip. They just rescued 4 hostages, which is great. But they left behind a couple of hundred innocent casualties in the wake. Now, I'm not taking sides. I think Israel was attacked and they have the right to defend themselves. But that could blow up as well. The history of this planet is the use of force. People take what they want by force. We saw North Vietnam try to take South Vietnam, and ultimately they did. We've seen Russia take the Crimea and now trying to take the main body of Ukraine. So that is still out there. Would China like to take the United States? Hell yes. So if Russia really can't constitute that much of a threat unless they go nuclear to our country this day, what about China? What about a yellow dawn scenario with them invading the United States? Some theorists predict that the Chinese attack on the U.S. could come probably as a part of China trying to take Taiwan. China, the People's Republic of China, considers them a breakaway state who they intend to reunify with the rest of the country, perhaps sooner than later. But the thought is that if they're going to start a Taiwanese invasion, they're going to couple that with missile attacks on U.S. Navy assets in the Pacific, including bases on other Pacific nations like Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia. They know that we have an investment in Taiwan, that we will probably come to their aid in case of an invasion. So they're going to neutralize our assets the most they can to prevent us from assisting Taiwan. But to go beyond Taiwan and actually try to invade the continental United States, what we in the military always called CONUS, that's a whole nother step. They got to cross the giant Pacific Ocean without us knowing that they're coming, and they've got to try to hit the beaches on the West Coast. The East Coast is so much more densely populated that And there's so much more in the way of military assets on the East Coast that the West Coast would be the logical place to try to do an amphibious assault. Is that what they're going to try to do? Is that even a remote possibility? Our oceans protect us from an invasion, don't they? And that's what so many military thinkers have said for so long. But I'll tell you, in many ways, the pre-attack activities have begun. Both Russia and China have launched cyber attacks against the United States for a number of years. They're testing. Where can they gain access? What systems can they disrupt? And they're going to try to disrupt as much as possible if they're actually going to go to war with us. Of course, we're going to try to do the same to them. So let's look at what precursors to World War III might be ongoing in the United States today. And the information I'm going to give you is open source. There's nothing classified about any of this material. You can find it on the internet. You can find it on YouTube. Foreign nationalists from multiple countries, as I'll point out as we go along. Potential terrorists have been caught attempting to gain entry to U.S. military facilities. Here's some video about that.
Jordanians, some of them just crossed the border. What's going on?
Well, you know, this thing of our military bases getting penetrated by foreign nationals is happening more and more. You know, this is something we see probably 2 or 3 times a week, where we're stopping these folks at the gate.
A week
at least, and this is just Navy alone. Where we're seeing folks try to come in, and usually the cover story is, and I'm a student, you know, I'm here, I'm an enthusiast, I want to see the ships, that type of thing. We have to turn them around, and typically we get NCIS involved with those, and we get biometrics when possible. But yes, there's been an uptick in that.
Do they have passports? Do they have?
A lot of times they have passports. They have papers, yes, but they're in no way, shape, or form authorized to be on our base. And it's really hard for us to tell the underlying motive for these type of cases.
Wow, that's stunning.
It is.
It's got to be a concern.
This is Russian, Chinese. It comes from all these different nations. We're seeing an uptick in it.
In addition to that, there's been some reporting on this over the last 6 months. You're getting 2 or 3 drones flying over military bases in America per week.
2 Jordanians attempted to breach security at the Quantico Marine Base in Virginia. They didn't get very far, and the Marines landed on them, took them into custody. Here's some video on that.
One of the Jordanian nationals who is in ICE custody and is accused of trying to breach a vehicle barrier at Quantico Marine Base is actually someone who came across the southern border in April and was released by Border Patrol agents soon after. When Border Patrol agents found that there was no derogatory information on his case and no criminality, they released him into the United States after he crossed into California with a future court date known as a notice to appear document. When the individual tried to drive into the Marine base at Quantico on May 3rd, he was accompanied by another Jordanian national who we now know was someone on an expired student visa. The 2 told guards at the Marine base at Quantico that they were there to make a delivery as Amazon subcontractors. But when those guards realized that the 2 had no permission or credentials to be on the base, they referred them for further inspection. The 2 then tried to breach the vehicle barrier and were stopped by additional security apparatuses.
A Chinese national attempted to breach the gate at 29 Palms Marine Corps Base in California. Chinese tourists gained entry, made it fairly well into the base, at the U.S. Army base at Fort Wainwright, Alaska. They claimed they were just sightseeing. Here's some video on that.
Not all who appear to be tourists are in fact tourists. Instead, they may be foreign spies. That's according to an Army officer speaking to USA Today about suspected Chinese spies trying to infiltrate military bases in Alaska in the guise of tourists. There have been encounters of said tourists attempting to enter military bases in Alaska. Oftentimes it's chalked up to a mistake, but other times the incidents are found to be intentional in order for these reported Chinese spies to gain information on U.S. military sites. According to first-hand accounts from several soldiers, they witnessed a vehicle with Chinese citizens blowing past a security checkpoint at an Army base in Fairbanks, Alaska. The vehicle was eventually stopped and searched with a drone found inside. The Chinese citizens claimed to be tourists who were lost. Alaska is home to some of the Pentagon's most sophisticated military facilities, which can attract foreign spies.
And these are undoubtedly probes of these bases. They're testing base security. They're gathering intelligence about what is located on that base. They have cameras. They have drones. They can claim to be tourists all they want. That's not what they are. It has also come to light that senior officers in the JSOC units, that's the Joint Special Operations Command. So the units involved in this are Army Special Forces, Delta, SEAL teams, the Marine MARSOC Special Operators. Air Force has special operators as PJs and combat controllers. The senior officers of many of these teams have been under surveillance for several months. On May 3rd of this year, a Special Forces colonel stationed at Fort Liberty, formerly known as Fort Bragg, saw an individual photographing his home and his children playing in the yard. I'll give you a good video that gives you a lot of details on this situation. But it goes into these senior JSOC team leaders are under surveillance.
Fort Liberty, Fort Bragg, we need to call it. Special ops soldier being investigated in a Moore County fatal shooting. So there was this mysterious shooting that happened in Fort Bragg. Now they call it Fort Liberty since 2020. Not far from where, obviously, the most elite special operations forces in the United States Army live and train. He's under investigation by Army CID as well as local police. This shooting took place in Carthage, North Carolina on May 3rd at 8:15 p.m. So we have not heard about this. This has been since May 3rd, but you're just now hearing about it. Nobody is reporting on this or keeping it completely quiet. And you may ask why. Well, it's probably because the information we're going to go through, right? 2 Chechen men who spoke broken English were found near the soldier's home. The family alleges the suspected intruder, a 35-year-old Ramzan Darav from Chicago. Why was it Chicago? Because that was a sanctuary city. Was taking photos of their children near a power line in a wooded part of the property. An altercation ensued between Darav and the special operations soldier. He was shot several times at close range. There was a second Chechen man that was found in a vehicle some distance away from where the incident occurred. The deceased, so the Chechen man, was found about 250 yards from the roadway along a power line on the resident's property. Identification was not on the guy, so he didn't have any ID. He was sanitized. He was later confirmed from family members. Now, the Chechen man, his family has set up a GoFundMe, right, saying that he was wrongfully assassinated. But anyway, there was an international identification card in the vehicle. The shooter turns out to be a Special Forces colonel. That means he's the commander somewhere. Some high-level commander of a special operations unit. Could be Delta Force, right? CAG, whatever. And he was targeted, right? U.S. special operations soldiers around the country have experienced very similar and strange interactions in the past couple of years that have had surveillance of them and their families. So these 2 Chechen men had no personal identification at all, other than that international card. They did have 2 cell phones with Russian language contacts, and they had high-tech camera equipment. They were not wearing the uniforms from the power company they said they worked for. The other bigger problem is the FBI is not even freaking investigating it. What this sounds like to me is asymmetrical warfare. The start of it. Guerrilla tactics, terrorism, blackmail, these sort of things. That's what they do.
Okay, so we have probes by the Chinese, multiple locations. Islamic terrorists at Quantico Marine Corps Base. The incident with the Special Forces colonel at Fort Bragg, Fort Liberty. They're Chechens. They barely spoke English. They have phones with Russian language material on them. They have very expensive camera gear, not the kind that Joe Blow is going to run around and take pictures of his electrical work. Chechens are a problem. Chechens can be Russian believers, but the Chechen country is also populated very heavily by Islamic folks. So they could be Islamic terrorists. We're not sure which side of the street they're on. That investigation is very much up in the air, and very little information is coming out about it. So this recent string of incidents, multiple players, multiple locations, this is like a buffet. It's like eating off the buffet at Golden Corral. Are we looking at possible terrorist attacks? Are we looking at possible military attacks? Or both? Joe Biden's policies have allowed millions of illegal aliens to cross the southern border, and to some extent the northern border as well. They gain instant release into the country. They not only get access to the country, we're putting them on planes and flying them around wherever they want to go to minimize the impact in the border area, to kind of spread these folks all over the country. Most of these are very undesirable immigrants. They all claim asylum. Oh, I'm coming from a terrible country. Yeah, well, there's a lot of terrible countries in the world. I don't think we have an obligation to take those poor souls into our country when we're getting kind of full. But, yeah, I'm an old mean white guy, I guess. Among these illegal aliens are hundreds, perhaps thousands, of Islamic people from unfriendly countries who are on the no-fly list or on the terrorist watch list. We know this. They have identified them. They are immigrants of special interest to the Border Patrol. That's the one we know of.
Who started collecting all of the passports that the illegals are dropping on the floor. They don't want to have ID on them when they get apprehended. So they drop their passports on the floor in California and Texas. And this one resident's picking them all up. And he's got a pretty clear idea of who's coming into the country. Watch this.
They're just dropping this stuff on the ground to come here and assume a new identity. So that's a little bit scary with my military background and seeing the people that are coming across that male, these are all military age males. People keep saying that. I've got the proof right here.
So there you go. The passports are right there. They're largely military aged men. Many from communist China. A lot of people worried that Xi Jinping is creating a little baby army here in America. Who's watching that?
So they're dropping their IDs. We have no idea who these people are. They just give us a name. It gets written down, they get released into the country. These are the ones that we know of. How many more potential Islamic terrorists or foreign national U.S. haters are gotaways? They don't make contact with Border Patrol. We don't have any information of how many of them came in, what names they're using, or anything else. People who are paying attention to these things, experts have reported as many as 100,000 Chinese illegal immigrants have crossed the southern border during the Biden administration, and they have disappeared into the U.S. Many of these 100,000 individuals, according to some sources, perhaps most of them, are fit, military-age, single males, not females, not children. Some of them have buzz cuts that look like they're fresh out of boot camp. Lately, there have been Chinese folks come here and go through training, and one Chinese national has been found over the last 2 or 3 year period that attended several of these classes from different former military trainers. And he now is back in China. He is a major in the People's Liberation Army, and he is training their people how we train our people here. So he was not just some Chinese student over here who graduated from college and hung around for a while. He was a spy to try to find small arms, unit level training and take it back to his country. And now he's training over there. So China's been trying to steal not just intellectual property from us, they're trying to steal our military tactics and our training techniques as well. Do you really think China cannot control their people to the point that over 100,000 of them can sneak out of the country, go to Ecuador, and then work their way up walking or riding buses through Central America to get to the Mexican border and cross here? I find that hard to believe. Here's a video that Tucker Carlson did with a gentleman, and he's going to tell you about a camp near the Darien Gap in Panama.
You may have come across the phrase Darien Gap, and it's never really explained what it is. It's a physical place. It's between Panama and Colombia, and it is a gap in the Pan American Highway. In other words, if you want to get from South America to North America overland, you have to go through the Darien Gap, but it's very difficult. And yet, last year, at least 520,000 migrants crossed it to come here. How did that happen? What is it? What is going on in the Darien Gap? It's the key, in some ways, to this story, this immigration story. Well, almost no one has taken the time to go to the Darien Gap and find out what's happening there. Leave it to a world-renowned biologist to do that, not a journalist, a biologist. That would be Dr. Brett Weinstein, who is the host, along with his wife, Heather, of the Dark Horse podcast. And he was just there last week because he wanted to see it for himself. We're honored to have him join us now to tell us what he found. Dr. Weinstein, thank you so much.
Very good to be back with you, Tucker.
So that was my feeble attempt to ad-lib an explanation of the Darien Gap, but can you a little more precisely tell us what it is?
Sure. You did a pretty good job. The Pan American Highway is a road that literally goes from Prudhoe Bay, Alaska to the southern tip of South America. It is unbroken but for a 60-mile stretch between Panama and Colombia. It is not a canyon, as many people imagine the gap must be. It's an impenetrable piece of jungle, and all of those borders are tightly controlled.
Oh, I've been, yeah.
And so it is very surprising to find those controls are effectively lifted here. That's clearly the result of a massive coordination, and of course it's resulting in a large migration. But what I was going to tell you about the fact that this migration doesn't appear to me to be just one thing is that we went to another camp called San Vicente, and everything in San Vicente is different than it was at Canaan Mambrio. San Vicente, first of all, it's not a town. This is a camp that is built as a transit camp. It's built of containers and various objects to house people. And it is almost entirely Chinese. Now, there were Chinese folks. Chinese.
That's a long way from China.
It sure is. And what's more, in this camp, the rule that you're able to go in and walk around and talk to people is not in evidence. The Senafront, the Panamanian Border Control, actually forbid us to go into the camp. So we had to stay on the outside of it. We were also forbidden to photograph it. So what photographs we have were taken covertly. But the most striking thing...
Wait, may I ask, so is it the government of China, do you believe, that's funding this?
Well, let me tell you the other thing I found, and then I think the answer to that will become clearer. Outside of the San Vicente camp, the Chinese migrants are, you can interact with them. There are a couple of shops where they go to buy water or snacks or whatever. And so you can interact with them at those places. They are the opposite of forthcoming. They have no interest in talking to outsiders. It is not a friendly migration. These Chinese folks who are overwhelmingly male, military age, there are women present. I realized only this morning that in thinking back, I saw few, if any, children in the Chinese migration. They were everywhere in the other places we visited, but they were not present, as far as I remember, in the San Vicente camp. So what I have pieced together, and this is a place where I'm going to speculate. This is a hypothesis. This is not a conclusion. But what I began to suspect was that the Chinese migration is actually being cloaked by the economic migration coming from South America. And that is consistent with the observation that it has some different motivation. That there is an invasion taking place is causing us to have difficulty discussing the invasion, which is a distinct phenomenon.
And different simply from desperate peasants from poor countries coming here for work.
There was no desperation in evidence, and Michael also gave us a video, which I can't establish the origin of, but it is a Chinese cartoon set to happy music of a migrant moving through Central America, changing modes of transportation, and it basically indicates here's the route you will travel. Now, was it produced by the CCP? I can't be certain of that, but that certainly is suggested that this is a message about how to make this journey. For what purpose, I don't know. But I do not believe that the people I encountered had left China without the knowledge of their government. I believe their government has some reason to have facilitated.
But the administration must be aware of this.
Our administration?
Yes.
It is, but here's the problem I've been wrestling with. It used to be that it was hard to convince people that our system was deeply corrupt. Back in the days when those of us who were focused on this issue used to talk about campaign finance reform,
Right.
It was a problem, that you could grapple with. It was of that scale. Now it's like a whole different level of corruption, right? And here's the question that I've never heard a good answer to. What stops our enemies internationally from buying influence over our system in the same way that corporations do and did? Certainly our enemies will have noticed that we have a system that's pay for play, and it's certainly, it's perfectly in keeping with Sun Tzu. At the very least, it would be far cheaper, easier, safer from their perspective to persuade us to harm ourselves than to go to war with us. Somebody has persuaded us to endorse a policy that is decidedly not in our interest.
So it really appears that People's Republic of China has sent members of the People's Liberation Army here. They're sneaking them in as illegals. If there are 80 to 100,000 Chinese soldiers in our country now, you're looking at 5 or 6 infantry divisions. Do you really think that if that's what's going on here, that they're invading us openly? They don't have to come in an amphibious operation on the West Coast. They don't have to drop paratroopers in here because they've already got them in the country now. With the hundreds of thousands of containers that get shipped into this country every year, do you think it would be all that big a deal for China to have some containers sitting here unopened with the equipment that these folks needed to suit up and become military folks overnight? If their people are here, and that could be their motive for being here, certainly they could open up containers and they could get enough gear to form into a lot of military teams. One of my military sources told me that in the last few weeks in both Long Beach and up around Oakland, I guess, San Francisco and LA, California, there have been odd occurrences in the nighttime when small boats come running in quickly, pull up to a pier, several people jump out, run across the street, get in a car, the car takes off, the boat takes off. In the Tucker Carlson interview, talked about a separate camp just for the Chinese, how they're going to probably Ecuador and then working their way up. Now that's the grunts. That's probably the lower level enlisted and maybe, mid-level NCOs are running that operation. But if these people are coming into the ports of California, and some reports suggest that these are older military age male Chinese coming in those boats, that tells me they're probably bringing their senior commanders in, because senior commanders aren't going to hike from Ecuador. They're going to come in clean. They're going to be pre-positioned areas where they're going to meet with those people. China owns lots of land in this country. Several states are trying to take action now to prohibit Chinese ownership of lands. And a lot of the farmland they're buying just happens to be fairly close to a U.S. military base. So now we have bases to put these people in the United States. So, talking to my military friends, I said, give me a rundown. How well protected are our military posts? Let's play this Tom Clancy thriller novel game and say we have 100,000 members of the People's Liberation Army of China pre-invaded into our country. They have some uniforms, small arms, grenades, RPGs, small stuff that they might be able to pull out of containers. With those, what could they do to a U.S. military base, which would then get them heavier weapons, armored vehicles, and other severe damage that they could do to our U.S. military? So I said, how protected are our military posts? Most of my friends just laughed at me. Most military bases depend on a combination of civilian Department of Defense police and military polices from the branch that we're talking about. An example, my Air Force friend, he mentioned a specific Air Force base in California. He lives close to there. That's where he retired from. He said, in my best guess, I would say there are probably no more than a dozen armed individuals on that Air Force base at any given moment. That would be security police walking around guarding the flight line for the planes, and Department of Defense police manning gates or on patrol in housing areas and things like that. So he said, you know what? A couple of well-trained, well-armed squad-sized teams could probably take almost any air base for a while. They could overrun it. They could kill the security. They can destroy aircraft. They could kill or capture the senior commanders, because a lot of times the headquarters buildings have no security specific to them and aren't even locked. Now the nuke sites, where our missile silos are, have a much higher level of security with security police. Very, very difficult for them to breach either the launch rooms or the missile silos. I don't know what they could do from the outside to render them inoperable. Maybe they could park a tank on top of the door that slides. I don't know what it would take. If they can kill the security elements around those silos, they can't get in. They probably can't damage them or launch them, but they might be able to render them unable to launch. Kind of frightening ideas. I talked to a very close relative. He was an E9, Master Chief, Master at Arms in the Navy. And I asked him about base security at Navy bases. He said it's really not much better than any place else. 20, 30 armed individuals are going to get on that base. They're going to kill most of the security that's there. He said the ships that are in port are well protected, especially after the Cole incident, where the boatload of explosives was driven up near a destroyer or frigate. I'm not sure what kind of ship it was, but over in the Middle East, they blew a hell of a hole in the side of that Navy ship, killed some sailors and wounded many more. But he said the ship security has been upgraded dramatically, and that's what he did, so he knows what he's talking about. He said one thing about the Navy is any kind of an arms room on a base that's holding heavy weapons, ammunition supplies, he said those are not really well guarded, but he said they're built in such a way that they probably don't need to be real well guarded. He said they're going to need some serious explosives to blow their way into most of those arms rooms. So that's not a quick in and out kind of thing. He said the enemy teams that got on the base probably could get into headquarters and kill or capture senior commanders. They could severely hamper base operations. And while many of these bases are near each other, and so possibly support could move from one base to another, not if they hit all these bases simultaneously. There's nobody to call for help within the military, really. So I asked him a question. I said, okay, carriers that are in port, can they conduct flight operations? And he spent a good deal of his career on carriers. And he says, to my understanding, they cannot conduct flight operations unless they are underway. They need the movement of air across the deck of the ship going forward into the wind to get lift to help get those planes up into the air. Plus, when those aircraft carriers are in port, their air assets, the fighter units and bombers and tankers and things that they take with them on the carriers, are not on the carriers. The air assets are moved to another base. So he said there, basically you're looking at an Air Force base, and he said security there is probably not a whole lot better than the Air Force, so we could see those planes blown on the runway. Is it possible that the Chinese know how to fly our stuff? Could they not go in and blow up the fighters, but launch the fighters and use them? From what we know of the Chinese training and their aircraft, I think they're different enough that that's probably unlikely, but they can certainly go in and neutralize our air assets. And my Air Force buddy said, it doesn't take much to knock out a jet plane. They're actually pretty fragile when they're on the ground. Okay, my Army buddy, retired Green Beret, spent a couple years in Afghanistan before he retired. He said, a couple of squad-size, well-trained, well-armed teams could assault and disrupt any Army base, CONUS, continental United States. He said, at least for a short time. That would allow them to acquire some heavy weaponry, some armored vehicles. They could kill or capture senior commanders, probably knock out helicopter assets, which are not present on all Army bases, but most. It's not a pretty picture. U.S. Marine Corps. And my impression of the Marine Corps is that they have always been a little bit more combat-oriented than the other branches. The incursions that they had at Quantico and 29 Palms were handled very quickly. They got on these people as they breached security, they surrounded them, and they landed on them like Marines. Beyond that, I can't speculate, but I don't, I've been on Quantico a couple of times when I was at to the FBI Academy, which is on the Quantico Marine Base. It didn't look all that different from an Army base to me. I don't think there are all that many people armed on the base as military police, Department of Defense police, the regular Marines going about their business every day. They may have a rifle with them if they're out, on a road march or rucking around the backcountry, but they generally don't have ammo with them. We've had several attacks like the one at Fort Hood where people, screamed at the military, arm your people. You let them be armed in a foreign country in a war zone. Why won't you let them be armed at home? Because we are getting attacks on these military bases and they're helpless. These are our war fighters, but they don't have the tools they need to fight a war at home. That's the state of the art. That's where we're at right now. So I talked to a buddy that was retired from the Illinois National Guard. And I pretty much knew the answer to this, but I asked him and I said, well, how well protected are the National Guard facilities? We have infantry units here, we have armored units here, we have helicopters in a couple of National Guard locations here in Illinois. Every state National Guard has a headquarters, generally in the state capital. Every National Guard has a tag, the Adjutant General, a 2-star, either Army or Air Force, who's in charge of both the Air and Army National Guard for that state. That's Camp Lincoln here in Illinois, right outside the capital in Springfield, Illinois. Now, I spent a lot of time on Camp Lincoln. Most of the gates are not even manned. They don't have gate guards on most of them unless they get some kind of an enhanced security alert. So you just drive in and out. There are very few armed people on there. In fact, he said most of them probably don't even have active MPs who are running around armed. So the National Guard arsenals in various small communities, they're ripe for the picking to take whatever kind of heavier weaponry or vehicles this invading army might need. So I asked all of these people, I said, are you aware of, let's say in Illinois or Colorado, pick a state, National Guard, does the National Guard have a designated quick reaction force that if something goes to hell in Illinois, that they can assemble, load their magazines, and go out and deal with the problem on short notice? And the universal answer was no, there's nothing like that. National Guard units can assist with police operations within their state by law. Regular military assets cannot by law. There is a law called the Posse Comitatus Act, which prohibits U.S. military operations within the continental United States, or probably Alaska and Hawaii as well. Now, the Posse Comitatus Act can be waived by the president, and it has been waived multiple times by multiple presidents. The one that I knew the most about was during the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles. California National Guard was called up to deal with the riots, but they were like, a day and a half into it, and they're still not out there. And it's kind of hilarious if you see any of the footage. At one point, governor, the adjutant general, why aren't they out on the streets? Well, we have a plate that we put in the M16 that blocks it to semi-automatic fire, and we can't find them. So we got to find those and block them from full auto before we put them on the street. Oh, and besides that, we don't have enough ammunition to go around. And the governor was brilliant. He said, I got an idea. Give everybody one bullet. That way you got enough ammo to go around, and you don't have to worry about the automatic switch. But the California National Guard was almost completely inept in that situation. So President Bush the first, George H.W. Bush, waived Posse Comitatus. He sent some infantry units from Army 7th Division at Fort Ord and sent some infantry units from the Marine Corps from Camp Pendleton to L.A. And they got in some shootouts. They were not just there for show. There was some rounds exchanged. So it can be done. Posse Comitatus can be waived. If this Chinese thing kicks off before the election here, Biden's still in office, do you think he's going to waive Posse Comitatus and send our military after these Chinese folks? He should. It's an attack on our country. But let's just play this out Tom Clancy-like a little bit further. What if the leftists know this is going on and they want to have that in their pocket in case there's no other way to stop this election? I might be in left field, but I'm not clear out of the park yet. I think it's a possibility. So if my silly little theory is true, and there's 80 to 100,000 Chinese in here who are going to open up their containers, pick up their small arms, start hitting military bases to not only neutralize the military's ability to stop them, but also pick up equipment that they couldn't bring over in large quantities, maybe to kill and capture a lot of senior people. It's probably why they are surveilling the heads of Delta, Special Forces, SEALs, MARSOC. They want to neutralize those special operations teams because that's the biggest threat they face. And that's what my Green Beret buddy said. I said, how soon could we expect a coordinated counterattack by military forces against a Chinese attack from the inside? And he kind of scratched his head and he goes, well, it depends who the president is. Depends how fast they waive Posse Comitatus, how fast they can get these bases turned around from non-war status to war status. Pick up your weapons, load up your magazines. And he said, I'll tell you, he said, speaking for my people in the JSOC community, he said, they're going to be the first to fight. And he said, I think if we know what's going down and we have intel on where we can respond and try to stop some of this, he said, I don't think they'd wait for Posse Comitatus to be waived. They'd probably go anyway. Might be against the law, but this is war. And it's war here against our people on our ground. And he said, I'm going to tell you what, there's going to be some pissed off operators. But are they going to lose the top of their leadership because of the surveillance been done? Will those be some of the first attacks in the Yellow Dawn scenario? Could be. So if this goes down, if they're able to get on a lot of military bases, if they're able to destroy a lot of aircraft on the ground, the only air assets we may have left are going to be those air assets that are on deployed carriers. So they've got to get back here. And in the coming back here from the Pacific, they're leaving where they have been deployed rather heavily for the past few years, either the Persian Gulf, protecting the oil supplies, or keeping an eye on China and making them understand that it's not going to be easy to go to Taiwan. So if the Chinese were to launch an invasion here, that's going to draw all of our deployed resources back home. That opens up Taiwan for them. So this could be a multi-pronged attack for them to get Taiwan and get us at the same time. I ask, is it possible that the U.S. administration could be part of this plan? Cooperate with the PRC, the People's Republic of China, to attack this country, to stop the election, to turn us into the communist country that the leftists in this country have been dreaming of for ages? Could they be complicit with the Chinese in this? Nah, I don't think so. The Bidens have only gotten how many millions of dollars from Chinese assets? Bought and paid for by the People's Republic of China? People who worked for Obama and the Clintons idolized Mao Zedong. They think China is the absolute example of how the whole world should be organized. Yeah, I think these idiots could be complicit in an attack of this kind. But the thing that I think is, if that were to come true, I think the funny part about it is they're so damn stupid. They think the Chinese would help them turn this into a communist country and then leave. If the Chinese come over here and make it happen, they ain't going to leave, suckers. They're going to kill you too, and they're going to be in charge here. That's how mentally out of touch some of these liberal people are. That's who's in charge of this country right now. So the question is, could we be looking at Chinese military assets in our country here to help us have our little Bolshevik revolution and convert the United States forcibly into a Marxist government allied with the People's Republic of China? I'm not sure it's just a Tom Clancy novel. So, where do you and I fit into this scenario? I got to finish up my novel here. Where do the citizens of the United States fall into this? When I started this video, I said you need to look at your guns and your ammunition as tools. Now, if you're primarily a toy kind of gun aficionado, that's fine. God bless you. Go have fun. That time's over. When people invade the country and people start killing our citizens, then I think you'd better take those weapons you have and what skill you have and put it to good use. And might you die in the process of putting together a small militia in your community to fight these people? Yeah, you might. And I might. What kind of country do you want to live in? If you remember in Red Dawn, or you go back and watch the movie, a U.S. fighter pilot was shot down. He joined up with the high school kids, the Wolverines. He led them in a couple of little skirmishes against the enemy. But he told him, you got to hang on till spring, because in spring they're going to drop in special forces to every place we know of that has little groups of resistors like you. And the special forces, they're going to bring weapons and they're going to give you training and they're going to lead you. And Green Berets, that has been their mission since they were formed. To go to places, to take non-hardened soldiers, give them some training, give them leadership, and turn them into guerrilla fighters. If this scenario, this Yellow Dawn scenario, actually comes true in this country, you may be a part of being one of those Wolverine groups. And you got to hold on until we can get reorganized enough to get those special forces guys out to you. And that may be exactly how we have to try to save this country. Small pockets of resistance, armed and led by the Green Berets who are going to come out and train you and keep this country, hopefully save this country. So, this is crazy. We'll see if YouTube lets you see it. But is it really all that crazy? Okay, I showed you news clippings. This stuff is happening, folks. And it seems to me that it's growing to a crescendo. If you have empty magazines laying around, it might be time to load them. Thank you for watching. I look forward to your comments. If you think I'm full of it, then tell me. If you think I'm on target, let me know. Subscribe. Help me to grow this channel. I'm going to head back towards gun-related material. I hope I never have to talk about this again and we look back and say, well, that was a bunch of bullshit. Never came true. That's what I hope. Thanks for watching, folks. Lock and load. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl. Last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah. That's all there is till next time.